Welcome to the Jerome McClain Show. I'm your host, Jerome McClain, and let's get into our episode.
Intelligentsia, the endem of sarcasm, the nutty professor to your whack-ass marmalade. It's T-Bone from T-Bone and Chick Brew in the morning. Now available in podcast format. Simply search for the T-Bone and Chick Brew podcast, available wherever fine podcasts are sold.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Crystal?
Indeed we do. Trump really scrambling, making a ton of comments yesterday evening. He's begging other countries to help secure the Strait of Hormuz. He's saying maybe we shouldn't even be in Iran. Perhaps that's something he should have thought of before he launched this illegal war of choice. It's a lot to get to there. We're also keeping an eye on the markets as they open this morning. Oil prices obviously have been spiking, hovering right now around $100 a barrel, and huge potential economic fallout looming. Israel is reportedly running low on interceptors. Murtaza Hussein is going to join us to break down the damage to that country. Trump and his FCC are threatening broadcasters who tell the truth about his war. They are demanding patriotic news coverage. Very dystopian thing there. Tucker Carlson is claiming he's being spied on and may be charged by the Trump administration. And Trump official David Sachs says that he fears Israel may actually use a nuke, which is the first time the U.S. administration has actually acknowledged that Israel is a nuclear power. And obviously the dire warnings he's sounding is pretty remarkable coming from someone who is inside of this administration.
Yeah, that's right. For the first U.S. official ever, I think, to acknowledge Israel's nuclear program. So we do want to thank you, David Sachs, for finally acknowledging it out in the public. Thank you to everybody who's been supporting the show, breakingpoints.com. You can sign up and become a premium subscriber. If you can't afford it, no worries. Please just go ahead and hit subscribe to our YouTube channel. Crystal, we never actually thought we would hit 2 million. I mean, theoretically, I knew it would come, but I actually did not ever think it would come this quickly. So we're at 1.9 million. So let's get that extra 100K, all right? And then we can just worry about it. We can sail off into the sunset. So 1.9 million, get us to 2 million, hit subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, please share an episode with a friend. We really appreciate it. It helps other people find the show. Also, bear with us. Crystal is home. We have an insane tornado warning here. So who the hell knows what's going to happen here in the DMV area. If anything happens tomorrow, there you go. That's the reason why. But yeah, why don't we go ahead and start with the Straits of Hormuz and the crisis there?
Yeah, so Trump making all kinds of wild comments, posting on Truth Social, clearly scrambling, and increasingly one of the goals of the war is clearly to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which of course was open before we started this war, so really sort of backsliding here. In any case, have some remarkable comments from Trump on Air Force One yesterday evening, where he is not only begging other countries to help us out, threatening them and saying, you know, maybe he'll blow up NATO effectively if they don't join in helping to solve the problem that he himself created, but also saying, I'm not sure we should be there in the first place, which is just like, oh my God, like, what is going on here? Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Some of the countries would be helpful. Remember, it only takes a couple of people to screw up the strait, a couple of terrorists. You don't need their military is defeated, but all you need is a few people dropping mines here and there, and you louse it up. So we need. I would really am demanding that these countries come in and protect their own territory, because it is their territory. It's the place from which they get their energy, and they should come and they should help us protect it. You could make the case that maybe we shouldn't even be there at all, because we don't need it. We have a lot of oil. We're the #1 producer anywhere in the world times 2, by double, at least double. Now I think it's much higher than that. But we do it. It's almost like we do it for habit. But we also do it for some very good allies that we have in the Middle East.
So Sagar, we broke it, and now he wants the rest of the world to come in and fix it and say, maybe we shouldn't even be there at all. Yeah, you think?
Yeah.
You think maybe so? Maybe we should have thought of that before.
About 10 days or so. And remember, much of that oil is still yet to come online. It's going to take months for actually to dribble out. Japan, many others are actually doing releases outside of the United States. The entire global economy is scrambling, and nothing says I had a plan than having to beg other countries to have to come in and to bolster the U.S. Navy. I also think that what that does highlight is a massive humiliation for the United States at a big, like, global strategic level. This is the United States Navy, Blue Water Navy. Entire purpose of the Navy is to ensure commerce and trade on the high seas, and this is effectively a declaration we are not able to accomplish this mission without multiple other countries. It also is straining U.S. allies to the point where we're having to pit, against each other in a way where the top allies of the United States, in a matter of 24 hours, are all coming out and be like, yeah, I think you're on your own, man. And what this demonstrates is the chaotic nature not only of Trump and his so-called management of alliances, but it actually really calls into question the entire point of the global empire. And you really don't want to use these things until not only can they do it, but then if you're going to use it, it better damn work. And so for Iran, this tiny country, which they claim, or not tiny, but in terms of their military force compared to the United States, to be able to have this threat, which just so emasculates the global empire, what does that tell you about the emperor and about the empire itself? It's an absolute humiliation on the world stage.
Or you even have the Houthis joining in. And I mean, that's what's crazy to me too, is we had a trial run of all this stuff with the Red Sea and the Houthis. Ultimately, Biden infamously said, well, we're going to continue striking them. Do I think it's going to work? No, but we're going to continue doing it. Trump actually, did the same thing for a while, blew a bunch of people up, realized it wasn't going to work, and just sort of quietly walked away. So he should have known, because we had a trial run of this. I mean, same idea of regime change just coming from strategic bombing. We had a trial run of that in Gaza, where we in Israel committed a genocide, blew the whole area to smithereens, and guess what? Hamas didn't fall, which is a much weaker and less well-entrenched organization than ultimately the Iranian regime is. But I think what happens here is Trump really convinced himself, and probably had people like Netanyahu and Lindsey Graham and whoever in his ear, that this was going to be quick and glorious, that they could take out the Ayatollah. They had this opportunity to do it, that the whole thing, he was reportedly, according to Strait of Hormuz, telling Gulf Arab allies the whole thing would be over in 4 days and they would completely capitulate. So even though obviously military planners knew that there was a possibility that the Strait of Hormuz would be impacted because the Iranians been threatening this for years and years and years, he never thought it would get to that point. And now that we are at that point, the realization has set in that actually, I mean, I won't say we can't reopen it ourselves, but it would require a ground invasion, seizing the shoreline.
Right.
You would have, the mountainous terrain there makes it very easy for Iranian forces to come in, guerrilla warfare style, kill a bunch of our troops, take down a bunch of our equipment, and then retreat and hide and come back and do the same thing over and over again. If we and our allies do start escorting ships through the Strait of Hormuz, it makes everybody involved, including these, cargo ships, that these are just civilian, sailors trying to earn a living that have nothing to do with this conflict, makes them sitting ducks. So it really is an impossible situation. The only way to solve this is through some sort of a negotiated end to this conflict. And, at this point, Iran is not going to just back away without getting something in return to ensure that they're not going to end up in this place again. So here's the latest Trump move. The Wall Street Journal reporting, this is incredible. The Trump administration, as soon as this week, plans to announce that multiple countries have agreed to form a coalition, I call it a coalition of the willing, that will escort ships through this corridor, which runs along the Iranian coast, U.S. officials said. Listen to this last sentence, though. They're still discussing whether those operations will begin before or after hostilities end. Kind of a key point there. And to your point, we've got Germany already taking a pass. Next element, they're saying, yeah, we're good here. No thanks. We have the French similarly saying, no thanks, we're going to pass. We have the Canadians saying, we're good here. We had Japan come out and say, no, we're not getting involved. So I don't know. At this point, there is no country that has raised their hand and said, yes, please allow our ships to also be sitting ducks in this preposterous quagmire disaster that you've created for yourselves and ultimately for the world.
Yes, especially the Anglosphere. So, there's NATO countries, but then there's who are the top U.S. allies. It's going to be Australia, it's going to be the UK, it's going to be Canada. Well, Canada come out and said, no. UK, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, just this morning, no, we will not be joining into a war with Iran. And Australia also coming out. I mean, these are beyond even our closest allies, the so-called, part of the Five Eyes, and et cetera. But what that tells you is that when even those people are saying, no, we're not going to be joining you, it leaves you completely out on a limb and makes it so that you only have two options: some sort of escalation, a ground troop option. Currently, the internal reporting is they believe they want to try and cripple the regime by taking over Karg Island, which is a possibility. Some 90% of Iranian oil is exported via Karg Island. The other, of course, is a negotiated settlement. But to have a negotiated settlement would be, of course, a humiliation also on the world stage, which is why, as Professor Robert Pape always says, the natural way that this goes about is escalation. It's why Trump is already inside of the escalation trap. Why don't we play a 3 then of Trump now threatening NATO countries if they don't join in this mission? Let's take a listen.
They want to negotiate badly, as they should, but I don't think they're ready to do what they have to do. But I think they will be ready at some point. But we're doing very well with respect to that whole situation in Iran. We are talking to other countries about working with us on the policing of the strait. And I think we're getting good response. And if we do, that's great. And if we don't, that's great too. But remember, like as an example, in many cases, they're NATO countries. We're always there for NATO. We're helping them with Ukraine. It's got an ocean in between us. It doesn't affect us, but we've helped them. And to be interesting to see what country wouldn't help us with a very small endeavor, which is just keeping the strait open. And by comparison, it's small because Iran has very little firepower left.
Very small endeavor, very little firepower. So little firepower, in fact, that the U.S. Navy needs to beg NATO and all the other world powers to come in and to join us. I have been thinking, though, if this war is the downfall of NATO, maybe it'd all be worth it. But that's like a bigger picture thing. It is just insane and ironic. Also, it demonstrates how unilateral action will always come back to bite you, because when you get into that escalation, and now you don't have other countries who are bought into the message. It's not just our population. If you think America's population, which is 10 times more brainwashed and more rah-rah and jingoistic for pro-war propaganda, isn't on board with this war, according to every poll that we have out there, what do you think that the European population is going to be thinking about this? And don't forget, is that while our gas prices are already high, I think it's like $3.70 or something right now per gallon, go take a look at European and natural gas and petrol prices out on the continent. It's not great. They're also, many of the European countries, Crystal, especially in NATO, are furious because the United States is currently issuing sanction waivers to India and to any other country that wants to purchase Russian oil, which is already at sea. So they are massively enriching the Kremlin at this very time. The rest of NATO only really cares about Russia and Ukraine. Okay, well, guess what? This is enriching that country to a huge degree. I mean, we are pumping money into the Russian war machine. Oil is currently trading around $98, $97 a barrel, the highest level in years. The Kremlin is doing backflips. They want the price to go to some 140, 160 per barrel, which would be around $5-something a gallon here in the United States. That is the best case scenario for them, which is why they're also giving all this intelligence to the Iranians, which we're going to spend a lot of time here talking about some of the strikes and some of the pinpoint Mortaza is going to break some of that down. There is absolutely no way that's just Iran on its own. And how can you even be mad at Russia? As Trump even said, he's like, well, it is hard to be upset because it's not like we don't give all this money to Ukraine. The one thing you say about Trump is at least he does occasionally tell the truth.
Yeah, well, I mean, Trump is right that the Europeans are more screwed out of this than we are, because we are a net energy exporter. We have more tools at our disposal. You know, if he wanted to, he could say, okay, we're not exporting any more of our oil. We're keeping it here domestically. That would cause an entire global shit show. I mean, if you think about it, for the Europeans, they were very reliant on Russian gas. Obviously, they've largely cut that off. Now you've got the other primary source of their energy, which obviously the Middle East now is imperiled at best. So they are kind of screwed. And, you know, I did see a report this morning, Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, saying like, well, actually, we're letting Iranian oil tankers, transit the Strait of Hormuz to continue to supply the global oil markets. And that seems to have led to somewhat of a tick down in terms of the oil futures. And I'm talking like a tick down to 96 instead of 98, you know, effectively. But Trump and his regime are thinking that they can effectively bully our allies and the Europeans in particular into taking on this task after we created this whole entire mess. And they may be right, because the Europeans are sort of embarrassingly, you know, embarrassing at this point and weak, and they're kind of screwed, etc. But thus far, they don't seem too willing to want to join in this one. You've got UN Ambassador Mike Waltz, who was saying that not only do we request that our allies get involved here, we demand it. Let's take a listen to that.
Is he hoping that those countries are going to send ships, or have they committed to sending ships? And how soon will those naval escorts be ready?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Has anybody ever told you you were over-opinionated? How about this one? You can talk about everything you like, but don't talk about religion. Don't talk about faith. Don't talk about politics. My name is Jerome McClain, host of Jerome McClain Show, and I want to introduce you to a show called Over Opinionated with my friend from Southwest Virginia, Josh Scott. Josh has always been told he has been over-opinionated. He always tried to hold back these opinions, but he tried to back them up when he had to say something with facts and logic. Since he's grown up in many ways, he had to change a lot of his views and his opinions, as a lot of people should. He's not a millionaire from Fox News or CNN. He's just a hard-working, blue-collar type of guy. Give Josh Scott a shot at Over Opinionated with Josh Scott. You can find him on patreon.com/overopinionated at 679. You can also check him out on Twitter at NRV_guy79. Over-opinionated with Josh Scott, where he is this soft-spoken guy telling you the truth.
We talk about a lot of serious topics on this show. One very serious topic is women's health. One company that stood out to me was vslay.com, because the owner is very transparent about her own struggles in the women's health department and has great customer service, great deals, and frequent sales. You can check her out her great customer service, products about women's health, and frequent sales at www.bslay.com. That is www.bslay.com.
Well, I'll leave those, those conversations to him. The conversations are ongoing. I think there's an important point that's getting, kind of missed in the conversation, that 80% of the oil coming out of the Gulf heads to Asia. Only about 7-8% heads to the Western Hemisphere. And to your point on escorts, look, back in the 80s, under the tanker wars, then the last time Iran tried to constrain global energy supplies, you had French, United Kingdom, even Soviet Union forces in there escorting their tankers out that were heading to their markets. And I think that's what President Trump is calling upon the world, saying the entire world is affected. Iran can't hold your economies hostage. And we certainly welcome, encourage, and even demand their participation.
Welcome, encourage, and even demand. And, when you put out some rhetoric like that, to your point about the weakness, and then after those comments are made, the UK comes out and says, sorry, you're on your own for this one. Again, the level of weakness. And this is really everything for a global empire, a declining global empire like the US. Everything is about maintaining the facade. Everything is about saving face. And once that image is punctured, and once you're proven to be a paper tiger, and once the rest of the world says, we've got our own ideas about things, that is the beginning of the end.
Yeah, I think it's really, I didn't want to see it. Unfortunately, it's highly predictable. This is like classic empire behavior. Let's put the German one up there on the screen, for example. Here was Chancellor Merz reacting, skeptical about expanding any EU operation in the Straits of Hormuz. What they talked about specifically, this was a foreign minister. He said he was skeptical about potential widening of the mission in the Straits of Hormuz. We should be clear. They might make some token sort of announcement that they will help ensure navigation in the Strait of Hormuz after a cessation of hostilities, or Trump might take it as a victory that they'll say that they'll put their ships, somewhere near the Straits of Hormuz. But at the end of the day, if they're not sailing through, if they're not joining some sort of military action that's happening in the Straits of Hormuz in the way the United States Navy is currently being floated, that is a real screw you. And remember, as Crystal said, these countries are they have massive more at stake here than just the United States. Yes, in a drastic situation, we could just do an export ban. 90% of Japan's oil comes from the Straits of Hormuz, comes from the Middle East. 40-something% of China's oil comes from the Middle East. The Europeans, it's not just an oil problem they have, it's really natural gas because of Qatar. So Qatar's natural gas, their LNG, has been massively important to their ability to try and wean somewhat off of Russian gas since the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine. But you put all this together and the bottleneck of everything that's currently happening, and you are already seeing, remember, it's not just oil, it's not even just gas. We're also talking about helium. We're talking about fertilizer. We're talking about urea. We talked a little bit about that earlier. I was just looking this morning. China has already released a strategic fertilizer reserve. I didn't even know they had such a thing. Smart behavior, by the way, real country behavior. Guess which country, major economy, doesn't have a strategic fertilizer reserve or any reserve of any kind? The United States, which means our farmers are going to be massively at stake of the global market. And also, China and the U.S. have an upcoming, Trump and China have an upcoming summit, which is supposed to take place at the end of the month. And the president is even saying that he may delay any sort of that summit or demand Chinese participation in some sort of Hormuz clearing operation if that summit were to continue to go forward. They don't care at all. This is good for them. There's nothing that they would love more than to have the United States embroiled in a weeks or years long war in Iran, which is they get all their interceptor, they're watching the satellites. I saw pictures come out of the PLA, the People's Liberation Army headquarters, where they're just monitoring the situation with these giant monitors and maps. And they're just sitting there watching these missiles go up, calculating trajectories, looking at what's working, what's not working, who, by the way, controls the global drone supply parts. Where do you think it all comes from? Comes from China. All of these electronics, they're just sitting there quietly and preparing. Meanwhile, there's increased military activity in the Taiwan Strait, just to show you that, they're pushing their proxies as well. Their main proxy is North Korea. North Korea just launched a ballistic missile 2 days ago over Japan. They're freaking out in East Asia. South Korean press is all over this. President Trump apparently had to hold some therapy session phone call with the president of South Korea, who is furious, obviously, about the removal of bad batteries. Like, the global order itself is very, very shaky already as a result of this war. Shall we get to Kevin Hassett? Or do you want to
let's go. No, let's go. Well, just one quick thing on that, to your point about sort of like the global order is shaky. And in a lot of ways, the global order is being determined as we speak, depending on how this war shakes out, how long it goes, how damaging it is to the U.S., how damaging it is to the world, how damaging it is to the empire, what the Gulf countries do after this. And in that way, it truly is a world war. A world war is not necessarily about like the number of people killed or exactly the number of countries that are involved in hot military action. Right now, if you look around the world, you have a whole lot of countries in these interrelated hot war conflicts. But in any case, what a world war really is about what the world order is going to look like coming out of that. And I think from that definition, we are already in one. Let's go ahead and take a listen to Kevin Hassett here. Very noteworthy. Someone else made this point on Twitter that the administration, this wasn't Marco Rubio coming out. You didn't have the military brass. It was largely like the economic guys who were sent down on the Sunday shows to make the case, which tells you a few things. I mean, it tells you maybe the number one thing that they're concerned about is really the markets. And that is an intentional Iranian plan. Now, this is as much about the Iranians waging economic warfare as it is about the military conflict. They see that dimension as being the most crucial because they need to exact that pain on America to force them to accept their terms and make sure that they don't end up in this situation again. So Kevin Hassett, who's the chief economic advisor for Trump, gets asked about, so, hey, if this goes on for months, like, what is this going to mean for the economy? Let's go ahead and take a listen to how he responds.
If this disruption lasts for months, can the U.S. economy absorb the shock without a recession?
First of all, it's not going to last for months. President Trump's team has briefed us that it's going to be 4 to 6 weeks, beginning 2 weeks ago, and that we're ahead of schedule. And so, second, if it did last for a long time, it wouldn't really do a lot of harm to the U.S. economy. Now, certainly, there'd be pocketbook issues that we'd have to address, but the bottom line is that the U.S. produces so much oil that you can't really get GDP to go negative with an oil shock the way you could in the 70s. So we're in a very strong position, but it's really heightened the strength by the fact that we've got a productivity boom from artificial intelligence, we've got a capital spending boom because of the big, beautiful bill, and we've got... And so all the fundamentals of our economy are really, really strong. If Iran thinks that they're going to get President Trump to back down because they're going to make our economy weak, then they just don't understand economics.
So Zachary basically just dodges there, like, well, it's not going to last that long. Yeah. They promise this is not going to last that. Oh, really? So how's it going to end? Because no one can say that.
It's worth even grappling with what he said. He said our GDP won't be affected, and he's not wrong. Yes, Exxon is going to do great. Okay, Midland, my home state of Texas, Houston, it's going to be a fun time. All right, to be a club owner in the city of Houston. It's going to be super fun to own a Ford dealer out in West Texas or in the Panhandle or in in Lubbock or any of these places. That doesn't mean that it's going to be good for the rest of us. Already, gas is $3.70 about a gallon nationally. Let's think about the scenarios where it's like $4.50, $5 a gallon. Let's say even average. I would say one of the worst case scenarios is around $5 a gallon average. That would be probably $6.50, $7 a gallon in California. That is a disaster, I think, for normal American pocketbooks. That also translates into demand destruction. That's what our friend Rory has talked about, where when gas starts to tick up that high, people are like, all right, I'm just not going anywhere. I'm not driving to my uncle's house or something like that. But don't forget, we got the July 4th holiday in a few months. Are people going to be driving, right? So these are times usually when people are always traveling, who are either driving, not to mention jet fuel. Jet fuel prices in Asia, I think in Singapore, jet fuel is going for $200 per barrel right now, because there's something about the specific I'm not an expert, but the experts that I have been reading have been warning that this is going to directly translate into air traffic. Also, there's been just the war, the actual disruption. So while we were all sleeping last night, a bunch of flights which were en route to Dubai had to turn around in the middle of the air and actually go back to where they came from because of a huge fire that broke out. Remember, Dubai is one of the busiest airport, maybe the busiest airport in the entire world. They handle tens of thousands of passengers per day, even on a limited schedule. So already they had to cancel flights for a prolonged period. They're warning people, do not come to the airport. They have immense censorship in the UAE, so I haven't even seen any real videos that have been coming out as a result. But just think about the danger to air traffic in one of the more busiest parts of the entire region. Qatar Airways, many of these places, these are gateways to Asia. So this will have demand destruction at every level, from the war and to oil. So I think last thing, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, that airport is also just very crucial to the economy of the UAE. It's billions of dollars every day in revenue that comes through there. And I did see images that purported to be of a fuel depot near the airport on fire after, presumably an Iranian drone strike. So yeah, their economies are still, being messed with in a way that is probably going to be very difficult for them to recover because their brand is being destroyed. The Iranian foreign minister went and did a couple interviews yesterday as well. And he said, hey, the Strait of Hormuz, it's open for anyone we want it to be open for. It's not open for the U.S. and their allies, but, for other countries, sure, Strait of Hormuz is open. So let's take a listen to that.
As a matter of fact, the Strait of Hormuz is open. It is only closed to the tankers and ships belong to our enemies, to those who are attacking us and their allies. Others are free to pass. Of course, many of them prefer not because of their security concerns. This has nothing to do with us. And at the same time, there are many tankers and ships who are passing through the Strait of Hormuz, and I can say that the strait is not closed, but it is only closed to American, Israeli, ships and tankers, and not to others.
Yeah. But we do know, though, that obviously traffic through the Strait of Hormuz is greatly, greatly, greatly diminished because, even if you are not U.S. Israeli flag tanker owned tanker, you're probably not feeling real safe going through there at this point. And the insurance rates have just astronomically skyrocketed. I mean, a bunch of insurers are just like, yeah, we're not insuring actually your voyage through this area.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, then sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show. Help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.
Our main story tonight concerns J.D. Vance. Sworn in at just 40 years old, he's our first millennial vice president, so we can confidently say he's the first VP to have definitely jacked it to Space Jam. I know to some, Vance might appear to be just another abrasive MAGA arsehole with a load-bearing beard, but to many on the right, he's a towering intellect. The president of the Heritage Foundation said Vance is going to be one of the leaders, if not the leader, of our movement, and Tucker Carlson once called him the smartest and deepest senator he's ever met, which is kind of like Ryan Lochte calling Cookie Monster his go-to guy for investment advice. I don't trust any of the individuals involved to be reliable judges of any of the subjects involved. And his rise to become Trump's right-hand man is especially striking, given as recently as 2016, he was casting himself as a never-Trump Republican, saying he might write in his dog for president, or if Trump had a really good chance of winning, hold his nose and vote for Hillary Clinton. Privately, he even mused that Trump could become America's Hitler. And yet, just a few years later, he was campaigning for Senate alongside Trump and adopting a very different tone, something that did not go unnoticed.
You know what? He's a guy that said some bad shit about me. Come on up, JD.
The president is right. I wasn't always nice, but the simple fact is he's the best president of my lifetime, and he revealed the corruption in this country like nobody else.
I mean, I guess that is true. Donald Trump definitely revealed corruption in this country like nobody else, in the same way no one taught us more about what a Ponzi scheme is than Bernie Madoff. It's true, just not in the way I think you're implying. And Vance has turned out to be perfect for Trump, as in many ways he's become like a son Trump doesn't even have to pretend to love. And as VP, he has served dutifully, often receding into the background, but willing to be an attack dog when needed, like when he demanded Zelensky say thank you to Trump in the Oval Office. He's also relentlessly defended his boss's moves, even when they directly contradict his prior beliefs, like his anti-interventionist approach to foreign policy. When people criticised last year's US strikes in the waters off Venezuela, calling them a war crime, he replied on Twitter, "I don't give a shit what you call it." And when Trump decided to first strike Iran last year, Vance defended him and didn't even try to come up with a good rationalization.
I certainly empathize with Americans who are exhausted after 25 years of foreign entanglements in the Middle East. I understand the concern, but the difference is that back then we had dumb presidents, and now we have a president who actually knows how to accomplish America's national security objectives.
Yeah, it wasn't okay before because the presidents were stupid heads who ate dumb for breakfast, but now we have a big, strong real estate developer and state salesman to give us the national security expertise we so badly need, so it's completely fine. And look, obviously, some of that's just part of being vice president. You have to roll over for your boss. But it's worth remembering, Vance has an inside track to the Oval Office in the future, not only because polls show him leading the Republican field for 2028, but also because if this guy doesn't make it through his term either, because the 25th Amendment got invoked or his internal organs decided, you know what, dude, you can't keep doing this to us, we're out, J.D. Vance will become president. So before things reach that point, it feels like tonight, it may be worth looking at J.D. Vance, what he stands for, and who he might be without Donald Trump. And I'll skip over his early life because it's been well chronicled in his best-selling memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, voted 2016's #1 Christmas gift by Oh Fuck, Emergency Airport Purchases magazine. If you haven't read it, long story short, he was raised in Ohio by a mother who battled an opioid addiction and his loudmouth grandmother before a stint in the military in Iraq and attending Yale Law School. If you want to know more, you can read the book or just watch the movie adaptation featuring this scene where his grandmother catches Vance smoking weed and decides to raise him herself.
Oh, I don't give a rat fart what you're smoking, kid. If you think you're hiding it, honey, you're dumb as a bag of hair. Pack up.
For what?
What are you doing?
I'm taking him.
Where?
To live with me. And if you got a problem with that, you can talk to the barrel of my gun.
Listen. This is a pro-Glenn Close show. Always has been, always will be. That being said, no, I do not like what I'm seeing there. The only good thing, and I mean the only good thing that came out of that film is the fact that when Glenn Close was nominated for Best Supporting Actress and attended the Academy Awards, she was approached by Lil Rel for a music trivia game, and this happened.
You know how to do the butt. Quick, turn it on. Come on, let's see it. Let's see the butt. Let's see it.
Yeah, that was 8-time Oscar nominee Glenn Close doing debut on camera. So, Hillbilly Elegy was a terrible film, but let's not say it didn't give us anything. Anyway, Vance's book hit stores during Trump's first run for the White House, making him a hot commodity for news shows looking for someone to explain the grievances of the white working class. And at the time, he struck what seemed to be a fairly moderate tone.
I think that this election is really having a negative effect, especially on the white working class, right? Because I think a lot of these grievances are legitimate, but what it's doing is it's giving people an excuse to point the finger at someone else. It's point the finger at Mexican immigrants or Chinese trade or the Democratic elites or whatever else. And sometimes these villains are legitimate. I think it's totally fair to say that the policy elites of the Democratic Party haven't been totally concerned about the white working class. But at the same time, fundamentally what's going on and what Donald Trump has done is change the focus of the white working class from a sort of engaged and constructive politics to a politics of pointing the finger.
So watching that now feels weird for a number of reasons. First, I never thought I'd long for J.D. Vance's beard, but it turns out the thing none of us needed from him was more face. Without a beard, he looks like Radio Shack's assistant store manager of the year in 1998. He looks like he played Cartman in a live-action South Park movie, but also, it is strange to see such a nuanced tone from a guy who's since become such a troll. It'd be like finding old videos of your dog eating with a fork and a knife. What the fuck? Yesterday, I watched you take a shit and then eat it mouth first. How on earth did we get from this to that? And while that may sound like a fairly even-handed critique, since then, Vance has clearly picked a side between blaming the elites of the Democratic Party and finger-pointing Republicans. And some of that may have to do with his mentor, Peter Thiel, the co-founder of PayPal and Palantir, and a man who looks like he got stuck trying to animorph between Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. Vance has said of Thiel that if there's something interesting going on and I want to bounce ideas off of a very fascinating and knowledgeable person, I'll give him a call, which is worrying given Thiel holds some troubling views. In 2009, he wrote that he no longer believed that freedom and democracy were compatible, and more recently called the quest for diversity very evil, as well as giving multiple lectures around the idea that critics of technology or AI are legionnaires of the Antichrist. Thiel is a huge influence on Vance, who's attributed pretty much his entire career to Thiel's mentorship. They met when Thiel spoke at Yale, when Vance was a student, and Thiel later wound up hiring him and eventually investing in his venture capital firm. He then backed Vance's 2022 Senate campaign with, at that point, the largest amount given to a single candidate in congressional history. That campaign, by the way, gave us this political ad with a truly iconic opening line, written by Vance himself, that somehow gets worse from there.
Are you a racist? Do you hate Mexicans? The media calls us racist for wanting to build Trump's wall. They censor us, but it doesn't change the truth. Joe Biden's open border is killing Ohioans, with more illegal drugs and more Democrat voters pouring into this country. This issue is personal. I nearly lost my mother to the poison coming across our border. No child should grow up an orphan. I'm J.D. Vance, and I approve this message because whenever they call us, we will put America first.
That whole ad has a terrible vibe, and I don't think anything could fix it. Not even the fact that you could sing the beginning to the opening of Bohemian Rhapsody, and it scans perfectly. Are you a racist? Do you hate Mexicans? Two questions, by the way. He never ends up answering them. It was during that campaign that Vance made that appearance with Trump that you saw earlier, and I wish I could tell you what happened to him between 2016 and that moment, but sadly, I am not a mind reader or the therapist he so desperately needs. Vance will claim it's because he believed Trump turned out to be a great president in his first term. Others might say he's a power-hungry ladder climber who saw that the MAGA right was the only way up, but I'd argue his shift was both opportunistic and genuine, because Vance has seemed to have journeyed farther and farther into some pretty far-right thought. Chris Rufo, the conservative activist, has jokingly described Vance's evolution as taking him from the pages of National Review to the fever swamp of right-wing Twitter. And Vance himself has said he's plugged into a lot of weird right-wing subcultures, which isn't something you want to hear from your Tinder date, let alone the fucking vice president. In fact, in many ways, he's become the archetype of the hyper-online conservative troll, right down to the whole kidding, not kidding, trigger the libs shtick. Just watch him brag about doing exactly that at an event a few years ago.
I got myself into a little hot water last week because I made what seemed to me a plainly obvious observation that Alex Jones, the InfoWars guy, is a better source of information than Rachel Maddow, the MSNBC gal. Now, some people said, well, JD, you're just trolling. Well, yeah, of course I was just trolling. But that doesn't mean what I said is in any way untrue.
Okay, so with all due respect, which to be perfectly clear is none, saying that Alex $1 billion in defamation damages Jones is a better source of information than Rachel Maddow is just laughable. The man's entire brand was called InfoWars. Also, calling Rachel Maddow the MSNBC gal is off base for so many reasons, including that she does not remotely give off the breezy energy that you associate with that word. Julia Roberts, that's a gal. Reese Witherspoon, definitely a gal. Paul Rudd, such a gal. Rachel Maddow, though, not so much. And Vance went on to expand on what he meant by that.
Ladies and gentlemen, the most important truths often come from people who are crazy 60% of the time, but they're right 40% of the time. I'm very close friends with Peter Thiel. I think Peter Thiel is one of the most important sources of non-conventional truth in our society. Peter Thiel believes some things that are considered crazy by opinion makers. We have to get away from this weird tension that we feel in our chest when somebody says, this person believes something crazy, therefore you must denounce them. Believing crazy things is not the mark of whether somebody should be rejected. Believing important truths should be the mark of whether we accept somebody. And if they believe some crazy things on the side, that's fine. We need to be okay with non-conventional people.
Okay, so here's the thing. We generally are okay with non-conventional people. I'd argue some of our best people are non-conventional. Cyndi Lauper, Lady Gaga, Barbara Streisand. She cloned her dog and has a tiny mall in the basement of her house. But if Babs came out and said Sandy Hook was staged, you'd be justified in retiring your DVD copy of Yentl. And look, in some ways, that is a very convenient argument for hanging out with odious people. Relax. I don't agree with everything they say, just the important truths. But it's worth knowing just how closely aligned Vance is with some pretty extreme thinkers. He's close friends with the conservative writer Rod Dreher, who said, among other things, that LGBT activism is the tip of the spear at our throats in the culture war. Vance also wrote a glowing blurb for a book co-written by the far-right activist Jack Posobiec, who promoted the Pizzagate hoax, a book, by the way, called Unhumans, a term that it uses for people on the left who it says undo civilization itself. He's also expressed admiration for Curtis Yarvin, a self-proclaimed neo-reactionary, who's not only said things like, we should put the church blacks in charge of the ghetto blacks, he's also argued for a policy he called RAGE, retire all government employees to seize and consolidate power. That thought clearly made its way into Vance's head and then straight back out of his mouth during this interview.
There's this guy, Curtis Yarvin, who's written about some of these things. I think that what Trump should do, like if I was giving him one piece of advice, fire every single mid-level bureaucrat, every civil servant in the administrative state, replace them with our people, and when the courts, because you will get taken to court, and then when the courts stop you, stand before the country like Andrew Jackson did and say the Chief Justice has made his ruling, now let him enforce it.
Yeah, not ideal, and what many people do erroneously think Andrew Jackson said that as part of the run-up, incidentally, to the Trail of Tears. There's no evidence that he did. And if we're going to completely make up Andrew Jackson quotes, how about this one? The Chief Justice has made his ruling, now let him enforce it. Also, I really hope in the future my fans are cool. If my historical legacy is two fish-lipped weird-beards growing out about me on a podcast, do me a favour, dig me up and kill me again. And it's worth noting that in Vance's vast amount of time online, he's ended up promoting some flagrantly racist bullshit. It tends to get forgotten, but Trump's whole "they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats" meltdown in the presidential debate came after Vance elevated a false rumour that Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio were eating people's pets. And after it all blew up and it became clear that the whole thing was total nonsense, Vance doubled down in a pretty revealing way.
When you have a lot of people saying, my pets are being abducted, or geese at the city pond are being abducted and slaughtered right in front of us, this is crazy stuff. And again, whether those exact rumors turn out to be mostly true, somewhat true, whatever the case may be, Caitlin, this town has been ravaged by 20,000 migrants coming in. Healthcare costs are up, housing costs are up, communicable diseases like HIV and TB have skyrocketed in this small Ohio town. This is what Kamala Harris's border policies have done. And I think it's interesting, Caitlin, that the media didn't care about the carnage wrought by these policies until we turned it into a meme about cats.
Okay, first, just a quick shout out to this look on Caitlin Collins' face. Because our eyes are saying what we are all thinking there, which is this guy for fucking real right now? Second, you didn't turn it into a meme about cats. You shared misinformation that turned a whole town upside down. And it wasn't even the fun kind of misinformation, like when that same summer, everyone got convinced J.D. Vance had fucked a couch, a theory that went so viral, it led to us calling Vance's team and asking, has the senator ever had sex with a couch? To which, by the way, they hung up on us. We then emailed them the same question, as well as asking, what about sex with a latex glove stuck between two couch cushions? Has Senator Vance ever had sex with any other furniture or household items? And anything else you'd like to add at this time? And they still haven't responded to us, which isn't exactly a resounding no, is it? And it's not like it is hard to deny that you fucked a couch. In fact, if you email, has John Oliver fucked a couch, has John Oliver fucked a couch.com and ask if I have fucked one, I promise you'll be emailed right back with an answer of, no way. Anyway, that exchange is basically J.D. Vance in a nutshell. He told a racist lie he found on social media, doubled down, then tried to play the you elites don't get it card to huff his way out of the whole thing. And at this point, it's probably worth talking about where J.D. Vance's political evolution has taken him, because it's pretty grim. On immigration, he's argued that while he bears no personal animus toward immigrants, they're the cause of many problems Americans face. He's claimed we're bankrupting a lot of hospitals by forcing them to provide care for people who don't have the legal right to be in our country. And he said that illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. Two assertions, by the way, that have been soundly rejected by experts. And when he's talking about immigrants to conservative audiences, the mask can slip all the way off.
There is a logic to what the Democrats are trying to do. It's disgusting, but there's a logic to it. They want illegal aliens to steal everybody's job, and now they want illegal aliens to steal everybody's vote.
It is totally reasonable and acceptable for American citizens to look at their next door neighbors and say, I want to live next to people who I have something in common with. I don't want to live next to 4 families of strangers.
Look, the thing on immigration is that no one can avoid that it has made our societies poorer, less safe, less prosperous, and less advanced.
Okay, that is just route 1 bigotry. Also, it's a bit of a tell to say that you want to be able to look at your neighbours and have something in common with them. That only really means one thing. And for what it's worth here, I don't think most people's biggest priority in neighbours is having something in common with them. It's just hoping and praying that they don't have a creepy trampoline kid who stares in your windows all day. Can you just bounce the other way? Can you do another way bounce? But remarks like those are part of a pattern of Vance expressing anxiety that immigrants could replace Americans. With lines like, you can't have so many people coming to the country at a time when our own families aren't replicating themselves. And that gets to another of his major obsessions, which is Americans having more children. To hear him tell it, it's an existential crisis. He's complained about the childless left and said the rejection of the American family is perhaps the most pernicious and evil thing the left has done, which is both untrue and just ridiculous. The most evil thing the left has ever done would be, hands down, these fucking candles. But this is a big deal to Vance. Over the years, he's repeatedly focused on prominent Democrats who didn't at that point have kids, among them AOC and Pete Buttigieg, to draw some sweeping conclusions.
There's just these basic cadences of life that I think are really powerful and really, really valuable when you have kids in your life. And the fact that so many people, especially in America's leadership class, just don't have that in their lives, you know, I worry that it makes people more sociopathic and ultimately our whole country a little bit less, less mentally stable.
Wow! Having kids makes you mentally stable? Is something only someone who is not the default parent would say. Because try working a full-time job, always tracking when the diapers are about to run out, what size shoes your kids wear, what they won't eat for lunch at daycare, which toy's their favourite, when the doctor's appointments are, when picture day is, which songs you have to sing to get them to sleep, how many child birthday parties you have to attend this weekend, and which ones specifically requested gifts. And also, if you leave the room, your child will scream bloody murder because you're the only one they want. I'm not saying kids can't give you a lot of things like joy, purpose, and hand, foot, and mouth disease, but mental stability is not one of them. And when pressed on those remarks a few years later, Vance's answer wasn't great.
Your position on those family values have gotten a lot of scrutiny lately.
Sure.
You've talked about childless cat ladies. You've called childless people sociopathic, psychotic, deranged. And I know that you've said that those comments were sarcastic, but it's hard to hear those words entirely as a joke. What do you actually think of childless women in society?
Well, as I said when I made those comments, look, they were dumb comments. I certainly, I think most people probably who watch this have said something dumb, have said something that they wish they had put differently.
And you said it over in several different venues.
A very, very short period of time.
Oh, well, you heard it here first, folks. If you're mean, dumb, and wrong, but in rapid succession, it's actually fine. And as for everyone says dumb stuff, not like that, they don't. The normal dumb stuff people regret is usually things like Armie Hammer is the next De Niro, or sure, I'll have a third Gordita Crunch, but not childless women are sociopaths. And if Vance really does want to make it easier for people to raise kids, there are things he could support. But he hasn't done that, and some he's actively opposed. For instance, he's railed against universal daycare policies, calling it a class war against normal people, and that normal Americans want a family policy that doesn't shunt their kids into crap daycare. And one of his solutions for high daycare costs was pretty infuriating.
One of the ways that you might be able to relieve a little bit of pressure on people who are paying so much for daycare is make it so that maybe like grandma or grandpa wants to help out a little bit more, or maybe there's an aunt or uncle that wants to help out a little bit more. If that happens, you relieve some of the pressure on all the resources that we're spending in daycare.
Holy shit, that is brilliant! Have family help! How did no one think of this? Just call the grandparents who are definitely close by and alive, or maybe an aunt and uncle who don't have jobs or children of their own to deal with. We can now close every daycare in the country because America's most eye-lined boy genius just cracked the fucking code here. Pack a bunch of family members into your house to help out, not too many though, or J.D. Vance will get nervous if he lives next door. And while he has gestured vaguely toward federal money to incentivize family to help out, I'll point out that hasn't happened. In fact, the only concrete action he took during his 2 years in the Senate when it comes to childcare policy was introduce the failed Fairness for Stay-at-Home Parents Act, which focused on helping parents who decided to leave the workforce altogether. And if you're getting the sense that what he really wants is to turn the clock back to the 1950s, you're getting warmer, especially given he's also expressed reservations about no-fault divorce.
And this is one of the great tricks that I think the sexual revolution pulled on the American populace, which is this idea that, like, well, okay, these marriages were fundamentally, they were maybe even violent, but certainly they were unhappy. And so getting rid of them and making it easier for people to shift spouses like they change their underwear, that's going to make people happier in the long term. And maybe it worked out for the moms and dads, though I'm skeptical, but it really didn't work out for the kids in those marriages.
Yeah, he said we shouldn't have made it so easy for people to leave violent marriages, which is just Wild for multiple reasons, including, you know what happened? Before you could easily get a divorce, some women would kill their husbands. By making divorce easy and accessible, what we have definitely reduced is the amount of women in fabulous hats who claimed, my husband fell ill suddenly. That is not just a victory for feminism, it is a lifesaver for shitty husbands everywhere. But it gets even worse because Vance is also hard-line anti-abortion, as he explained in a radio interview when he ran for Senate.
Should a woman be forced to carry a child to term after she has been the victim of incest or rape?
Look, my view on this has been very clear, and I think the question betrays a certain presumption that's wrong. It's not whether a woman should be forced to bring a child to term, it's whether a child should be allowed to live, even though the circumstances of that child's birth are somehow inconvenient or a problem to the society. The question really, to me, is about the baby. We want women to have opportunities, we want women to have choices, but above all, we want women and young boys in the womb to have the right to life.
Okay. Every part of that is awful. Not just calling becoming pregnant by rape an inconvenience or taking women out of the pregnancy equation altogether, but also the phrase, young boys in the womb. What the fuck is wrong with you? If you can't discuss the realities of pregnancy without sounding like a high school football coach subbing a health class, don't comment on them at all. So that is at least in part who J.D. Vance is, and I'd argue it is repellent. But the dangerous thing is, he's proven himself able to hide the worst parts of himself at moments when the most people are watching him. Take the VP debate, where for 90 minutes, he managed to come off as measured, reasonable, and compassionate. Several times during that debate, Tim Walz actually said, I agree with you. And once it was over, many analysts seemed surprised by what they'd just seen.
Let's face it, Vance looked very reasonable. He looked rational.
He seemed at many moments to be reasonable. Yeah. And that was clearly a change in tone.
I was getting texts from Democrats, panicked, quite frankly, who were saying, wow, he's really moderating himself on a lot of these issues. He's the most likable he has ever been.
Yeah. It's true, even though, for what it's worth, it's not like that is the highest bar to clear, is it? It's basically saying the Mucinex mascot is more fuckable than ever. That's not saying as much as it frankly should. The point here is, when the next election rolls around, if he can put that act back on when everyone is looking, we may be in trouble. All of which is why it is so important to remember who J.D. Vance actually is, because he'll present himself as an anti-elitist man of the people. But much of his career has been bankrolled by tech billionaires. He'll go to bat for Alex Jones, arguing we should show grace to those who are 40% right, but he'll happily co-sign on childless people being sociopaths and the left being unhumans. He'll offer empathy and understanding when it comes to non-conventional thinkers, but has no problem deriding immigrants as a net negative on society, and it's not hard to see what the difference between those two groups are. The point is, I know Vance is easy to write off as a charismaless arsehole, but scratch even 1 inch under the surface, peel back the beard, and you'll find something far worse, his batshit views and his bare fucking face. Oh, and one last thing. J.D. Vance also stuck his dick in between the cushions of a sofa and thrust himself back on form until climax. And if I may quote the man himself, yeah, of course I was just trolling by saying that. But that doesn't mean that what I said was in any way untrue.
And this is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in Los Angeles, headed to Mexico City, to Cineteque Nacional tonight, where they're showing the film about Democracy Now!, Steal This Story, Please. I hope to see folks there. And tomorrow, also part of the Ambulante Film Festival. Check our website at democracynow.org. And we're joined by Democracy Now!'s Juan Gonzalez in Chicago. Earlier this week, the UN Security Council adopted a resolution condemning Iran for its, quote, egregious attacks against its Gulf neighbors, specifically attacks on residential areas and civilians, as well as its closure of the Strait of Hormuz, threatening global energy supplies. Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Jordan are specifically mentioned in the resolution, which had 140 co-sponsors. Of the 15 Security Council members, 13 voted in favor, with none against. China and Russia abstained. Bahrain's UN ambassador, Jamal Faris al-Rawai, said the vote reflected the collective conscience of the world.
This overwhelming support from the international community reflects a collective awareness of the danger posed by the unjust Iranian attack against our countries, the Kingdom of Bahrain, the GCC, and the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan over the past 12 days. The adoption by the Council of this resolution today confirms that the international community is united in addressing and confronting these hostile acts. The stability and safety of the region is part and parcel of the security and peace architecture.
Russia's representative to the UN called the past resolution biased for not acknowledging Israel and the United States as instigators of the war. Russia introduced a second resolution for an immediate halt to all hostilities in the Middle East without naming any parties involved. That resolution failed to pass. This is the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Mike Waltz.
Once again, Russia is acting here at the Security Council to protect its partner, Iran. We reject Russia's attempt to conflate lawful U.S. actions taken in line with Article 51 of the UN Charter, to conflate those actions with Iran's pattern of bloodshed and brutality to its own people and around the world, and with its recent deliberate and at scale targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure across the Gulf and the Middle East. The United States will continue to work here at this council and beyond to hold the Iranian regime to account and to bring to light its destabilizing and unlawful actions. Russia's attempts to prevent this council from acting in line with its core principles will not deter us.
For more, we're joined by the economist Jeffrey Sachs. He's the director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University and president of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. He's also served as advisor to 3 UN Secretaries General. He recently wrote an article headlined, "This illegal U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran is also an assault on the United Nations," unquote. In an open letter to the UN Security Council in February, Professor Sachs said it was the U.S. and not Iran that had walked away from negotiations and that U.S. threats against Iran violated international law. He said, quote, "The issue facing the UN Security Council in these perilous days is whether any member state, by force or threat of force, may place itself above the United Nations Charter that governs us all. At stake is the integrity of the UN-based international system," unquote. Professor Sachs today joins us from Rome, Italy. Thanks so much for being with us, Professor Sachs. Why don't you elaborate on this letter and your statements about the UN international order and what is happening today with the U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran and Iran's retaliatory attacks?
Thank you very much, Amy. And what a chilling show to hear Gideon Levy, to hear your report from Beirut. We have a war of blatant aggression that is going to put the entire world into a disaster. This is a war of aggression and a war of choice by Israel and the United States. It is in the most blatant, frank violation of the UN Charter and the core of the UN Charter, its purpose, which says that nations shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, period. That is Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the UN Charter. Waltz, the U.S. ambassador, says, oh, we're acting under Article 51. That is the article on self-defense. The United States is not acting in self-defense. Israel is not acting in self-defense. These two countries are committing flagrant aggression, and they've done it twice now in the context of negotiations, which makes it all the more pernicious. Twice the United States claimed it was negotiating with Iran, and twice it killed Iranian leaders in the midst of the so-called negotiations. This is the most blatant and brazen assault on the UN Charter and international law since it was founded in 1945. Even in the Iraq War and other U.S. war and Israeli wars of choice, they faked it at least. Here they don't even fake it. They just are blatant aggressors with no justification at all. Our UN ambassador is Green Beret. They have militarized everything about our society, Amy and Juan. We are in a security state, not a constitutional order. No one asked the American people about whether to go to war or not. And our Congress doesn't want to have anything to do with this. So when they're asked, they say, don't ask us. This is we give it to Mr. Trump and to Mr. Netanyahu. So I think this is the most brazen fascism that we have seen since the fascist era. And it is absolutely extraordinary. And it's going to put us, I think, probably into World War III. And if it doesn't do that, it's going to put us into an economic calamity worldwide.
And Jeffrey Sachs, I wanted to ask you this narrative now that the Trump administration has been pushing in all of their pronouncements, that this is actually attempting to end the war that Iran launched against the United States decades ago. And they make it seem like everything that's happened that has been Iran aggressing against the United States, forgetting obviously that the role of our country in goading and supplying Iraq in its war against Iran in the 1980s and the various other attacks by Israel and the United States against Iran in the past.
Look, every word that Donald Trump says is vile and ignorant. So we can almost say for sure that every word he posts every day is a vile lie. But when it comes to the United States and Iran, yes, this does go back a long way. In 1953, when Iran had a fully functioning democracy, the CIA and MI6 overthrew the government of Mossadegh, Prime Minister Mossadegh. We installed a police state. We installed a police state that lasted from 1953 to 1979. When the Iranian people took back their country, we immediately armed Iraq, as you said, Juan, to go to war with Iran and to kill hundreds of thousands of people. When that war ended in 1988, the United States continued through the CIA and other means to do everything possible to destabilize the Iranian government, to crush the economy, to impose U.S. measures, sanctions, and so on, to destroy the well-being of the population. When the Iranians said, we want to negotiate with you, the United States rejected at almost every stage, with one exception, which is that in the Obama presidency, the United States, together with Britain, France, China, Russia, Germany, the permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council plus Germany, the P5+1 as it was called, negotiated an agreement with Iran that put Iran under strict UN supervision, the International Atomic Energy Agency, to ensure that what Iran said was actually carried out, which is that Iran did not want a nuclear weapon, and the IAEA would inspect. And for 3 years, the IAEA inspected hundreds and hundreds of times, and Iran was in full compliance. And then what happened? Netanyahu and Trump ripped up the agreement and went back to war, a hybrid war with Iran. Everything Trump says, which is despicable because he is absolutely leading us to ruin and leading the world to World War III, everything he says is a lie. Because he says, I'm stopping Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. What he has done is rip up the agreement that already existed to ensure that, assassinate Iranian leaders repeatedly, kill the Iranian religious leader who for decades had said that a nuclear weapon would be against Islamic law, kill that person, invade or bomb the country with carpet bombing now, and is presiding over what is now already a regional war with Israel behaving as usual in its completely fascistic way of genocide in Gaza, locking up the West Bank, as Gideon Levy just told us, and invading Lebanon and displacing already 1 million people, bombing the universities, bombing the hospitals, bombing the schools. This is so out of control without any logic, any rationality, even not any humane, moral, legal justification whatsoever. We have not seen anything like this since the fascists of World War II. And it is extraordinarily dangerous what's happening. It will lead to world war the way we're going because we have 2 malignant narcissists, Netanyahu and Trump, that are leading us to disaster. And you listen to Netanyahu's words, he explains this has nothing to do with the UN Charter. He says, we're not waiting, we are initiating. Well, that, Mr. Netanyahu, is against the UN Charter. You're not allowed to initiate war under the UN Charter. You've explained it very clearly. You are making a war of aggression. And you, too, Mr. Trump, you are making a war of aggression, and you're threatening the entire world. It's really as simple as that.
Professor Sachs, we have less than a minute. President Trump yesterday suggested skyrocketing fuel costs are a good thing. You're an economist. Trump wrote, the United States is the largest oil producer in the world by far, so when oil prices go up, we make a lot of money. This contradicted what he said at the State of the Union, saying oil prices were lower than under President Biden, and he was very proud of that. 30 seconds, your response.
He may put money into the hands of a few oil companies which pay his bills, which are corrupt, which pay his campaigns, but he's going to impoverish Americans, and he's throwing the entire world into a profound economic crisis. And the world's going to remember, and it's going to know very soon, Israel and the United States have put the entire world into a profound economic crisis. Again, the first thing you know, anything Trump writes is a combination of ignorance, malevolence, and lies, including that statement, Amy.
Jeffrey Sachs, we want to thank you so much for being with us. World-renowned economics professor, director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University, president of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, has served as advisor to 3 UN Secretaries General, now a Sustainable Development Solutions advocate under Secretary General Antonio Guterres. We'll link to your articles at democracynow.org. As we end this show, a very fond farewell to our video fellow, Safwat Nazal. You will forever be in our DNA, Democracy Now! Alum, and thank you for your creativity, your humor, and your intelligence. Tonight, I'm heading to Mexico City for 2 screenings of Steal the Story, Please at the Ambulante Film Festival tonight at Cineteca Nacional. Check out democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Ryan, I want you to talk briefly about this incident that was very disturbing that I read about regarding an Iranian ship that got torpedoed by the U.S., because it does just talk about how there is, I think, a misunderstanding from certain people as to the brutality of war in the sense of how truly evil things that happen during a war are, and how this is going to be seared into the minds of people. And it's so important for people in the U.S. to stand up and go, yeah, this is not something that we co-sign. Can you just talk about that?
Yeah, this is a dark one. And India is actually roiled by this right now because it implicates them. So the Indians, they love to project that they have hegemony in the kind of Indian Ocean. They're the ones that are their Navy's going to keep the Indian Ocean safe. And so toward that end, they host this biennial kind of little festival of ships. Yeah. You know, I think 70 countries, including Iran and the United States, sent ships to these 2 separate but related events, and they did a live fire drill.
And when did they do this?
When they did it from, I think, the February 17th to the 26th.
Gotcha.
So it wrapped up 48 hours before, maybe 36 hours before the war started.
Right.
They paraded on land. The U.S. pulled out of one of the 2 of these little festivals, but did participate in the other one with the Iranians. So we're there, with them. As part of the kind of peace protocol for these events, you're only supposed to bring enough ammunition, to fire off, during your little events. You're not supposed to come all kitted up in a way that could cause serious problems. Also, you're out there doing these complex coordinated drills. You don't want something to go wrong.
Right.
And so they try to keep it as safe as possible. And so then it starts to head back to Iran, and this is where we need more investigation. It appears that it was then held at a port for something like 11 hours near Sri Lanka, or a Sri Lankan port, which people are suspicious was allowing kind of this nuclear sub to catch up to it. There's also the question of how did they find the exact location? There's some in India. They are speculating that the U.S. exploited its kind of joint intelligence network that it has built with India to get into the Indian system, and then because the Indians and the Iranians were, they invited the Iranian ship, and then they said goodbye to the Iranian ship. So they knew exactly where it was. So then the nuclear sub finds the ship and torpedoes it, and that the laws of war, the Geneva Convention, say that if it doesn't put your own ship at risk, you are obligated under international law to try to save drowning sailors, but you have to do the bare minimum. Also, under the kind of common sense of humanity, you see somebody drowning, it's like a meme. You see somebody drowning, throw them a rope.
Right.
That's what we do. We prosecuted a Nazi at Nuremberg for not doing that.
Right.
But often the Nazis did do it, which is we're below them at this point. So Sri Lanka's Navy had to come out and get there as fast as they could, and they managed to save, I think, 32 people from drowning. More than 80 Iranians died in the attack, and we posted the video with the caption something like, "This Iranian ship thought it was safe, suckers. You're not." And so now the Indian so this is interesting too. The Indian government is under enormous pressure because this is, a slap in the face to them. If you noticed yesterday, Trump lifted sanctions on Russia when it came to selling oil to India. Remember a few months ago, the biggest thing that Trump was worked up about was that India was buying oil from Russia. And he's like, I'm going to do 25% sanctions for tariffs. I'm going to do 50% tariffs. Stop buying oil from Russia. Now it's all fine. India can buy oil from Russia, and we're lifting the sanctions on Russian oil. That to me feels like kind of blowback from this. Like that Modi is like, I need something here. You're killing me at home.
You got to give me
made us
something.
look like fools.
How do you just
now Putin will get billions out of this?
What do you think China and Russia? What is the lens through which they're viewing the current Iran conflict?
There was this really interesting argument being made by a guy for Barry Weiss's news outlet, Javi Rettinger. He's like, he's like one of the smartest Israeli analysts out there. And so they sent their the brightest light out there to make the best possible case they could that the war on Iran that the U.S. is waging is not actually for Israel. It's actually about China. Right. And he lays out this case that there's oil that China gets from Iran. You can go read his case.
Yeah.
But it falls apart extremely quickly because, yes, it's true that Iran exports something like 80 to 90% of its oil to China. So you're like, oh, you see that number, you're like, wow, that really involves China a lot. That makes up something like 5 to 15% of Chinese imports.
Right.
They have plenty of oil that they can get from elsewhere. And also think about it. If we replace this government, if we manage to do a regime change and we put in a new government that Donald Trump says is wonderful, like finds his Delcy Rodriguez, why would that country not sell oil to China?
To China.
Like that
would make no sense.
Of course, yeah, they'll sell it to everybody. Like Iran will still be a country.
Right.
It will still produce oil.
Yeah, it would still have an economy, and it's one of the driving.
Have an economy. Yeah. Unless Haviv is saying that what Trump really wants to do is blockade China from buying oil from anybody around the world.
I'm sure China would have something to say about that.
I think they might.
You think they might? What do you think about the chances of boots on the ground? Coming? Not coming?
I think the chances of special forces are getting pretty high.
Reportedly, we sent Kurdish troops in already with special forces.
Yes, and then as we reported, actually,
you guys
immediately, it wasn't true. Okay. So that was fascinating. Yeah. That was leaked by the Israelis, it seems. That the invasion, not the invasion is going to happen, because you can get that wrong.
Sure.
And then it doesn't end up happening. They said thousands of Kurdish fighters have invaded Iran and are currently fighting inside Iran.
Right.
That was the reporting from a bunch of outlets. And it clearly seemed to be sourced from Israel. We talked to all of these different Kurdish sources, and all of them are like, no, it's not happening. Like, not casting judgment on whether it should, but it literally is not happening. And then this Iranian Kurdish base inside Iraq was bombed, which maybe was from Iran, who thought that the reports were true. Maybe it was from Israel, who's like trying to rile them up and say you need to go in there. We don't know. But it's not happening. So the invasion is not happening. So the U.S. is putting enormous pressure on them to go in. The problem is, in 1991, we told the Kurds to rise up in northern Iraq.
Yeah.
They rose up, and then Saddam massacred them.
It's always the Kurds.
We then supported them in Syria to go against ISIS. And a couple months ago, we sold them out.
Right.
So the Kurds have been saying publicly, all right, 1991, that's one thing. And also all of the betrayals going back hundreds of years. But 91 is one thing. You sold us out 2 months ago.
Right. That's insane. It's unbelievable.
So you think we're but they're still calculating, because they're under a lot of pressure to do it. And Bush and Obama were actually pretty decent for northern Iraq, the Kurdish region. So they're they're comfortable too. They're like, we've got our autonomy. We're happy.
Why get involved? What do you think? I'm hearing the Qatar is basically saying we want to pull our money out of the American economy. Saudi Arabia is, saying similar things. People are really upset out there. I mean, this could be a massive, collapse financially here. I mean, what is Jared Kushner doing right now? Is he calling these people on the phone, going, "Hey, relax"?
Yeah, he's got to, because he's so much of his business relies on the Gulf economy continuing to produce oil and gas and dollars, and then funneling those dollars into the grifts that the Trump organization, the Kushner organization are operating. Set aside the entire AI grift that is the U.S. economy at this point. Also, this should be obvious to people, but that stuff is the backbone of everything else. Like, if the oil and gas stop coming out, we stop making aluminum, stop making chlorine,
right?
We stop making the copper, the basics of our economy, and then we can't make semiconductors, and then and that happens as it's almost as if people forget March 2020. You remember how quickly the entire world fell apart from supply chain shocks?
Yeah,
wasn't that long ago. It's So that is kind of Iran's strategy. I think is to say like they cannot withstand, like they are already driven to absolute poverty and desperation by our sanctions.
Right.
So they're already there. So they can weather this.
Is it in any part in Israel's calculation, and this is for both of you guys, that this war would not only hopefully topple the leadership in Iran, but also serve to either weaken or outright sever the connection between a country like Qatar and America or the Gulf states? Does Israel see that as a positive? I know that, a lot of, people that promote ultra-Zionist ideas in this country are constantly accusing Qatar of running the country. The Free Press wrote an article about all the money that Qatar has put into things like higher education. I'm sure Qatar puts money into things, but the idea that Qatar is now incredibly skeptical of things the United States says and may not be able to trust us, is that something that Israel's excited about? Is that a good thing? And is that part of the calculation here?
Yeah, I mean,
go
ahead, Jeremy.
Just Ryan, to mention one concrete thing, because we seldom hear kind of the Iranian government perspective these days. It's really just kind of the Trump show, and because there's been this multi-decade campaign about Iran, it's very hard to actually, on just a basic factual level, say, well, what is their actual position? What Iran has been saying, Tim, about some of the retaliatory strikes that it's done over the past week is that they didn't do them. They're saying, for instance, that they have not attacked Saudi Aramco's oil refinery. They're saying that they did not strike the British military base in Cyprus. And in fact, the British government is saying they don't believe that the drone that hit that base and destroyed a base where American spy planes come from, that it came from Iran. They're saying it may have come from the direction of Lebanon, which is an interesting thing. The Iranians are saying that some of the hotels and other buildings they hit in Bahrain or in the United Arab Emirates were housing Israeli spies or American personnel. But why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing it up because what the Iranians are saying, and take it at face value, it should be fact-checked, we should look into it. What they're saying is that they believe Israel has engaged in some false flag attacks in some of these Arab countries, or potentially in Azerbaijan, in an attempt to try to draw those nations into the war as actual combatants in it. And Netanyahu is sort of gleefully talking about this. Trump's people are saying, oh, and even the Arabs are now going to start fighting against the Iranians. Certainly, Netanyahu loves to be the merchant of chaos when it comes to disrupting U.S. relationships with other countries. Certainly, he wants to see Qatar weakened. He wants to see the economies, the economic power of the United Arab Emirates and Qatar, the closeness of these countries to U.S. institutions and particularly to Trump, thrown into turmoil. He knows that the populations in those countries don't like what's going on right now. Yes, the attacks, especially when they hit hotels or they hit infrastructure, it's enraging the populations of the Arab Gulf. But on a much broader level, this is a war in service of Israel. And the populations of those countries, the anger is simmering. They understand what's happening. It's destroying. Their entire project was based on this idea, Tim, that the United States puts military bases in all these emirates, in all these kingdoms, and they have an American security guarantee. I don't think that they, in their wildest dreams, they thought that the United States was going to allow Iran to pummel them the way that they have, while pouring billions of dollars into the quote-unquote defense of Israel. So on one strategic level, and this cuts to your question, Tim, I do think that Netanyahu views opportunity in this. He wants to be the merchant of chaos to try to utterly destroy that relationship between the U.S. and these other countries because he views it as a threat. Trump is unpredictable. Trump is merging family business with the business of government. This causes some consternation for Netanyahu in his broader sort of project in Israel.
Ryan, do you think that Iran hit the Saudi Aramco facility?
They say they didn't, and they say it. So here, and their argument is this. And Jeremy interviewed the the deputy foreign minister on Wednesday and asked him directly about this. And paraphrasing him, he said, that would be insane because our entire economy is also based on the oil industry. Like, why? Like, you think we want to start a tit for tat where people are bombing oil fields? I frankly find that a fairly persuasive argument at this stage. I could imagine if this war continues to descend into chaos and it continues to climb up the escalatory ladder, that Iran may eventually strike an oil field, and we may strike all of their oil fields.
Do you think Lebanon?
I don't think that they.
Do you think Lebanon struck the Saudi Aramco facility?
I don't think Lebanon did it. I mean, okay. I think their claim that Israel hit this oil facility needs to be taken seriously.
So it's very possible.
And one thing, just for the record.
Yeah, go on, Jeremy.
Just to put a factual thing on the record, what I was told by the Iranians is not that they are against hitting oil facilities. What they're saying is, we will only do that if the United States and Israel start to attack our oil infrastructure. We're going to strike back at their oil infrastructure. Sure. Because we don't view it as simply the sovereign property of these Arab countries. We view it as facilitating and linked to the American project. But they're saying, as of now, that they never intentionally did it.
So I'm just trying to get this straight. Our ally, our closest ally, who told us that they were launching a war, a regime change war in Iran with our weapons and our money, also very potentially has attacked the oil Saudi Aramco processing facility in another one of our allies, Saudi Arabia, and also kind of one of their allies. A regime change war in Iran with our weapons and our money also very potentially has attacked the oil Saudi Aramco processing facility in another one of our allies, Saudi Arabia, and also kind of one of their allies. Israel and Saudi Arabia have like sort of an understanding, right? So
this is what the Iranians are suggesting, and I'm not saying I fully believe it. You know, it could be that they accidentally hit some of these things. It could be that they did do it and they're trying to cover it up. Although Iran, you know, I think that wouldn't really be to their advantage. It's possible that they did it, but the Saudis claim that it was debris from a drone that they shot down. But let's say we should just take this seriously and investigate it, because if it is the case and evidence emerges,
the Saudis
then
are
you're looking
saying
at Israel doing false flags.
Yeah. The Saudis are saying it's debris from a drone they shot down.
That was the initial statement by the Saudi. First, it was Iran bombed Saudi Aramco. Then a Saudi defense official came out and said this was actually debris that fell from a drone that we had intercepted. The Saudis and the Iranians have had an interesting diplomatic back and forth on this. The Saudis are not as aggressive right now in going after the Iranians as, for instance, the Azerbaijani government is.
Right.
And really, you know, sort of saying that Iran did this. The Iranians are denying that as well. So all of which is just to say we should never just take at face value the proclamations of the Iranian government.
Right.
But if you think about it on a common sense level, it doesn't benefit Iran to further enrage the populations of these countries, because they already are very nervous about what's happening. So who benefits from this, Tim? Who benefits is Israel, from the idea that, you know, Iran is this kind of madman, this mad dog loose, and they're just biting everyone. They're biting all their neighbors. They're biting the people who they've been in this rapprochement with for 2 years. It doesn't make sense. So that's why you have to pursue it and say, is there any legitimacy to what the Iranians are alleged?
The interceptors are a real problem. We don't have enough to combat the missiles and the drones that the Iranians are unleashing, not just on us, but on our military bases in the Gulf countries and on the Gulf countries themselves, our allies who we've agreed to protect. And some of them have come saying, did you give any thought to what would happen to us? Did you plan on how to protect us as we're seeing bombs rain down on Dubai, for example, which is taking a lot of incoming, many of our other friends in the Middle East who are genuinely friends of ours and great trading partners who are now feeling exposed and like we didn't live up to our promises, not to mention all the problems you mentioned because of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And Pete Hegseth says that we did plan on the closure or what would happen in the Strait of Hormuz. But if we did plan, then why is it closed? Why can't we get ships through there? Why can't commercial vessels get through right now? President Trump threw out, we'll have the U.S. Navy escort ships that want to go through it, but that quickly went away because he was reportedly told we are actually not ready to do that. Our military can't do that. And there was also blowback on whether American parents want to see their sons and daughters on U.S. ships risking their lives to get oil through the Straits of Hormuz to send off to China. Is that really the mission? And all in the name of Israel, by the way. It's not even for a war that's helping the United States. So it's right now we're not doing that. So the Iranians do have an effective veto over this. And there's a real question about how we ever can secure it. How can we, because they've got potentially mines set up in the Straits. They've also got missile launchers on the shores that are proving problematic for us. And I've heard credible military experts say, without sending ground troops in to go stand along the shorelines of the Straits, we're not going to be able to secure this in a way that's going to satisfy commercial shippers.
You're exactly right. And guess what? By the way, even for those military experts, I hope that they also informed you that if you want to put troops on the shoreline, then you also have to have troops in the rear to make sure that nobody can fire on the troops on the shoreline. So that would be a massive deployment. This is the escalation trap that Professor Robert Pape talked about, is that you find yourself in an unexpected situation politically. What did LBJ often say? I'm not going to be the first American president to lose a damn war. That's what he would often say in the Situation Room. And he would push them to escalate, to escalate, to escalate. And at every point we would say, okay, let's send more American blood into the battlefield, and that will change it this time. And at every point what we found out is that we were losing strategically while allegedly winning tactically. And that's what actually a full-blown ground troop invasion of Iran and securing of the Strait of Hormuz, that would be the definition of a supposedly tactical success. Because even at that point, let's think about what the cost of that would be, not just for the sustained deployment, the political and strategic implications. So yeah, we might lower the price of gas, but now we're in a multi-decade occupation of the country of Iran and fighting an insurgency with a civil war and a collapse of the state and refugee crisis, which is flooding the entire region. So that's why you don't get into these damn things in the first place. And I'm very worried. I do not see a way that this president will be able to get himself out of this one without.
That's the thing, because no one doubts. I think few doubt that Trump doesn't want that he thought this could be quick, cut out the head of the snake, and we're going to have a better Iran. He definitely doesn't want some extended Middle East war. Trump does know that would be a political death knell to any future Republican election over the next 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 years. But the risk is that we're saddled with it, because how are we going to reopen the Straits of Hormuz? What is the plan to do that? Are we actually going to risk American lives by escorting commercial vessels through there? What are we going to do about mines? Are we going to risk American service personnel getting blown up in the name of reopening this passageway? And by the way, what is the American appetite for the loss of blood and treasure over there? It was one thing when we had Al-Qaeda killing 3,000 Americans one day who just went to work. It's another when we started it. And the basis for starting it, which I'm going to get to in a second, is really, really questionable. But let me make one point first. Now we have 13 dead U.S. service personnel, which is the same number that died at Abbey Gate, Sagar. And after we had Abbey Gate under President Biden, where he tried to pull all the troops out of Afghanistan, and it was a disaster, and it wasn't well run, and we had people holding on to our airplanes as they were flying out of Bagram, in which we gave up the base. His approval rating fell, and it never recovered. It never recovered. Here's a chart that shows where it went down, and it never went back up. And that's the last thing we done. Now we've got 13, 1 week into the war, a week plus. Where does that go, right? Because
great.
Wars, it's not easy to predict how the deaths are going to happen. This was a refueling plane, Sagar. It wasn't even shot down by the Iranians. It wasn't even, it was an accident midair that wasn't brought down by friendly fire or enemy.
Right. Remember this, guys. Nobody in August 1914 said we're still going to be at war in 4 years. The plan was for a 6-week quick war, an excursion, all like the ones that we had seen before. This is why, by the way, I think that the Venezuela operation ended up being a nightmare because it convinced the president and many of the inner circle of those around him that that's how easy all military operations could be. And I opposed that vehemently at the time, and I think it looks pretty good in retrospect, is that at this mindset of this madness, right? Of just we can go in and we can do whatever we want. Well, we've all seen, there's a lot of military history books that are behind me. The way that great men operate, we can all understand this. It's like a gambler at the craps table who's on a hot roll. Statistically, it shouldn't be working, but it's working and it's working and it's working. But eventually, that 7 is going to come up. And that's exactly what has happened now in this Iran conflict. So you just laid out the Straits of Hormuz. I have bigger questions about not just this, that's an economic question. I have a question specifically about Iranian missile development the longer that this goes on, because then the entire raison d'etre for this war, the casus belli, is supposedly nuclear material. Well, by the Trump administration's own admission, that nuclear material has not been secured. How do you secure it? Oh, we're going to have to send special operations. Problem, the Iranians know you're coming. So to protect those special operations, you'd have to deploy a large ground force to secure the entire area, to battle all of the people who would want to target your special operators while they're going in there securing.
How are we going to do that in modern day warfare with satellites,
exactly.
etc.?
Right, exactly. So think about the nightmare and the logistical implications of each of these supposedly easy off-ramps. So the off-ramp here, Trump can go get the nuclear material and declare victory. Oh, wait, but that's going to take a titanic, potential American ground deployment, thousands of troops, who knows how many casualties. He needs to secure the Straits of Hormuz. Great. Now we just signed up for a huge nation building and or, exercise. Nobody in the Iraq war. I mean, do you remember Donald Rumsfeld? He said, I don't know if it'll take 6 days, 6 weeks or 6 months, but I can tell you it's not going to be more than a year.
Dick
I remember
Cheney too.
all of these things. Yeah, I mean, Dick Cheney said that about Iraq. Nobody in 2001, October of 01, would have said we're withdrawing from Afghanistan in 2021. You think LBJ wanted to be in Vietnam in 1968? That's the point of all of these examples, is that you get into them and they become open-ended even when you wanted it closed, because you are no longer in a controlled system. We could control the diplomacy between these two nations, but we cannot control this now, especially with Iran in the classic situation of asymmetric warfare, but with nothing to lose. They have nothing to lose except to fight to the death. They have a hardened political will. Their population was supposed to rise up. Didn't happen. Totally fake, right? I mean, instead, we're actually seeing a huge rise of nationalism in the entire country. So now what? We want to foment a civil war?
That's part of the problem is the bombing of their fuel depots, their oil depots, which literally caused oil to be raining down on the faces of the Iranian people, their children, their babies in strollers, anybody who goes outside now after that happened. And that caused even the crazed lunatic Lindsey Graham to say to Israel, you might want to watch what you bomb. Actually, you might have gone too far. I mean, when Lindsey Graham is telling you you've gone too far in your bombing campaign, something very, very wrong has happened. But you mentioned that this is a war of choice, which I agree with. This is not what the administration says. Of course, the administration says we had no choice. Trump says, I had a feeling, I believed that they were about to develop a nuke, that they almost had a nuke. And now we had an interesting conversation that I heard today between Bill O'Reilly and Glenn Beck, in which O'Reilly seems to be shedding more light on that. We're going to play part of it for you now. Watch.
Reached a period in time, in history, where the CIA, NSA, all of our intel jibed with the United Nations and said, look, we knocked out a lot of their nuclear capacity in June of last year, but they have satellites and are close to being able to put together 10 nuclear bombs, okay? 10. And I don't think the Trump administration is going to mind me saying this, even though it hasn't been made public, but I'm a reporter and I have the information. So Mossad went in and said, look, on this Saturday, the Ayatollah and 25 of his thugs are going to be in this place at this time. So what do you want to do? Now, that was after 3 months of negotiations with the Iranians to stop their nuclear weapons program. And the last negotiation in Geneva, Switzerland, the guy, the foreign minister of Iran, walks in and says, you know what? We're not stopping. Blank you. We don't care what you say. We're not stopping. And Witkoff, the chief U.S. negotiator, had a report back to Trump. So that's the information Trump has. Number one, they're close to 10 bombs. Number two, they're all going to be drinking tea on Saturday morning in this spot. And number three, they're saying blank you to the U.S. government. They're not going to stop. That's how the decision was made. But the president believes that he will be victorious in the next month or so. Puts us into April, puts us into China with Xi. And he believes he's going to have momentum after basically dismantling Iran, because that's what they're doing now. They're just wiping out its capacity to do anything, which is not easy, and that's why you're seeing the short-term pain. Now, people believe what they want to believe, and the president is no exception. If it comes his way, then he becomes a great president, which he wants, his legacy. If it doesn't, then the Republicans will probably lose in November. So that's where we are.
A lot to unpack there, Sagar. We've got 1 minute till we have to take a break on SiriusXM.
Okay.
We'll continue the discussion, but take the minute to go.
Privileged to be alive to have Bill O'Reilly lie to me twice in my life about WMD in the Middle East. I'm sorry, that's preposterous. There's no evidence for that from the IAEA. If that were true, the Trump administration would have said it. Remember, the only reason that they say that we're in this war is that Israel forced our hand, and that even whenever it comes to nuclear, they say that they were creating a ballistic missile shield for their potential nuclear capacity. There's been no DNI release, no CIA release, no even fake Colin Powell vial that can be held up, no yellow cake, no Judy Miller. So if there were even a remote case that were true, or as true as WMD in Iraq, they would have said it. They didn't say it because it's complete nonsense. That is completely manufactured consent, afterwards, that is being put out there to justify some of the feelings for the people that want to continue to be in this war.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Of course, if you want to support the show, you can do so by going to www.patreon.com and getting a membership for as little as $3 a month. Again, that's www.patreon.com/The Jerome McClain Show. The Jerome McClain Show is fully listener-supported, independent media that won't lead you to tribalism. Get a membership and support independent media at www.patreon.com/The Jerome McClain Show.